Today I'm sitting down with Elaine Chan, a Hong Kong-born, LA-based food entrepreneur who operates a Cantonese restaurant in Chinatown called Pearl River Delta. Their chef Johnny truly makes some of the best Cantonese barbecue out there. And oh my god, their shumai, you guys, it is dim sum and then some. I love following Elaine because she has family and friends still living in Hong Kong and mainland China, and she returns to Asia annually. She has an incredibly grounded and global perspective on the issues we've been facing during the pandemic, and is also a not-so-closeted hippie just like me. She's also just really, really fun to talk to, and no, that is not just my CBD cocktail talking. Elaine's going to share her perspective on the potential closure of what's known as a wet market, discussing what these global farmers markets actually are and the impact that their closure would have on culinary culture, not just throughout Asia, but the world. It's worth noting that neither one of us believes in the sale of wildlife, but wet markets by their definition do not necessarily sell wild animals, though they are being demonized in the media as such. Oh boy, it's a loaded issue, and you're definitely going to want to mix yourself up a CBD cocktail for this one too. So let's get to chatting with Elaine to learn more. You've got a lot of boots on the ground there in Hong Kong with what are your family and friends experiencing there as they come out of quarantine, and any kind of like insights as to how that might happen here?
They're still in. I mean, they're all still in quarantine. I mean, they're way more flexible. But you know, Hong Kong, there's another wave now, and Taiwan's more free, but they have like extensive tracking and tracing, and they wear. You know, my cousin went from Kuala Lumpur back to Hong Kong, and they slapped a bracelet on him, and it tracks him, and you gotta stay inside for 14 days, or else the thing's gonna go off. Like you're under house arrest. And it's necessary, and it seems draconian, but it's necessary because people, as you can see, don't do what they're supposed to do, like our beaches. So it's like, you know, people say like, we don't want draconian measures. It's our liberty. It's like this. It's like, well, then behave like, you know, normal, sensible human beings, and then we don't have to do this.
Yeah, that's wild.
They're not,
so wild.
Yeah, and people don't complain there. And people are just like, you know what? Like, I understand why this is here. It's not forever, so you know, do it, because that's the way you're going to somewhat contain it,
and like take care of. You know, I think there's also something to be said for the filial piety in Asia, and how people really genuinely do care about their family members, their elders, and people outside of themselves. And I think you're really seeing that like American ideal of like the me, the ego, you know, taking over and taking control. And it's like,
but do you know, like I grew up with a lot of these questions. Do you know why that is? It's because, you know, and when I moved here and immigrated here, this is the first time I'm like, what do you mean? Like, they're just going to kick you out when you're 18? What, who does that?
I know. So weird.
And then I go, okay, so if you're out on your own when you're 18 and your parents are like, okay, bye, you're done, you're an adult now. By no means are you an adult when you're 18.
Oh my God,
I'm sorry.
No. I'm still questioning if I'm an adult, let's be honest.
So exactly. So I'm like, and then you wonder why then the kids like stick the parents in
homes,
in nursing homes. It's like, well,
you forgot about me. So yeah, it's the whole family unit's really broken down here. It's very unfortunate. I kind of want to start in on this with defining what a wet market actually is, because it's such a nebulous definition. What is that exactly?
A wet market is just a local community market that is very much like a farmer's market, except that sometimes, often, livestock is there to be slaughtered live, or there's fresh seafood. And then occasionally, very rarely, you'll have a wet market that also sells exotic animals, wild exotic animals.
Right. And it's sort of in contrast, right, to a dry market, which would be a place that has, you know, pantry goods. Maybe there's dried herbs, rice. They're typically two separate things. And again, it's one of these places that it's not just in China. It's not just in Asia. These wet markets exist all over the world. Everywhere I've been, you know, Middle East, the Caribbean, South America, they're everywhere. And it's really the spectrum of what they look like is also so different. You know, Tsukiji is a wet market. There's fish being sold everywhere, but it's incredibly clean. You walk in there and it's like, you don't even smell fish, and yet you're surrounded by fish. Something that we had talked about a little bit was the regulation of this. Aside from closing everything down, which I feel like is just not possible because these places do feed so many communities, what would be the alternative to closing them all down?
Before I address that, I want to kind of go back because you hit a really important point. And you said the Tsukiji fish market doesn't smell like fish. And I think people miss the point that the reason why it doesn't smell like fish and it's clean is because the fish is very fresh. And all fresh food, fresh carcasses, technically, they don't smell.
Mm-hmm.
The reason things smell is because they've been frozen and it's been weeks before they land in our supermarkets here. And then so when you open that packet of chicken breast that you bought from the store, why does it have that like gamey meat smell? Is because it's been dead for a while before you went and bought it. So I think wet markets, so wet markets are revered, and it's important because that's where you can get fresh seafood and proteins.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why.
Yeah, it's I just feel like there's such a varying degree of it because, you know, there's Tsukiji on one end. And then I've been to one of the coolest markets I've ever been to was in Erme, which is like on the border of Tibet and, you know, in the Sichuan province. It was so cool. It was so gritty. And the footage we got was so amazing. I mean, they were like skinning fish alive. It was pretty fucked up, but it's very like, whoa, the texture to it. And just like seeing all the people bustling, moving around. And then there's someone selling these like giant baskets full of dumplings. And there's the woman with like carrying the produce on her shoulders and the little conical hat. And you're like, this is so, and you could tell she'd just like come from the farm, there are motorcycles like riding through the aisles. And it's just like, wow. What do you think would happen? Like if we were to say, close them down immediately, like how would that impact Chinese/Asian culinary culture?
A lot of people get access to their food via wet markets. And, you know, wet markets have an allure to them, and they're also practical because, you know, things are fresher, things are cheaper. You know, if you shut them down, a lot of communities are not going to be able to have access to food because maybe in some of the rural areas, all they have are wet markets. There's no like supermarket like, you know, here. And I think a lot of times Westerners, particularly Americans, we look at it and we're like, oh God, how can they have these wet markets? Like they shouldn't even be around. And I feel like we're looking at it from a lens of like, we have these big supermarket conglomerates where you walk in, everything's piled neatly. There's grocery store workers, they're in uniform. I mean, things aren't like that around the world everywhere. So I think when people judge from a Western point of view, it is through a perspective that's skewed towards a developed country, I guess.
That's such a great example of like, we're here making all these judgments. And yet at the same time, like just this week, they've announced, you know, Tyson and Smithfield, what's going on at their meat packing plants is like completely inhumane. Like, how is that okay? And a wet market, any wet market, all the wet markets are bad. Like, it's just so, you know, Eurocentric. It's a very Eurocentric way of looking at things.
And I think you bringing up Tyson and Smithfield it should be part of this conversation because like, I mean, I didn't mean to kind of like veer off the topic on your question, but it goes back to not about wet markets, supermarkets, Costco, X, Y, and Z meat plants. I think the foundation and the root of the problem really is food regulation and food handling and what are our standards. And I think everybody needs to be on the same page because the 2002-2003 SARS outbreak, they're suspected that it also came from the wet market.
Right.
But I think people don't realize is that there's stuff coming out of our meat plants too. That we don't talk about.
Yeah. I mean, like, I feel like every other week when I was really reporting on food, I was working in an alt weekly for the LA Times, and it was like, there's a listeria outbreak, you know, there's E. coli, you know, just like
salmonella. I mean, all of this is all part of the problem. And this is why our meats are dosed up with so much antibiotics.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing too, that's so frustrating about all of this is like the food system has gotten so large that there's just more of an opportunity for error. Like your odds are increased, right?
Mhm.
With the fact that we
Mhm.
can't even here in the US, like a farmer cannot legally grow the pig, slaughter the pig, and process the pig on premise. They can't even slaughter their own product. And every time you add in a step of that, okay, the pig is sent to then another processing facility. And then how many hands are touching it in between that? And it's in a refrigerator or freezer truck. And then from there, it goes to the processing plant. It's just so many steps in a process that like should be pretty connected and should be pretty simple. If we were living in much small, we just have to start thinking smaller, I think is maybe a solution here.
I feel like after this pandemic, I personally think that you're going to see more and more of a shift. Do you think farmers market's popular now? I feel like that's going to be a big, big thing moving forward.
I'm curious. We talked a little bit about like what would happen if these wet markets were eliminated in Asia, like for even just for your friends and family that are still there. What would that mean for them?
I mean, Hong Kong and Taipei are very, urban areas, but, you get even in Taiwan, like you get a further out, you go south, or you get a little bit out of, Hong Kong City, like Hong Kong proper. I mean, I feel like a lot of these more rural areas, they don't have supermarkets, and, they do rely, I mean, that is their market. Mm-hmm. It's cheaper, it's fresher. Sometimes it's the only way they can get food. So, taking away wet markets is definitely not a solution by any means.
And then it goes down the line again. We're seeing what's happening here with restaurants and then the farmers being impacted and everybody in the supply chain. It's like, well, then what happens to those rural farmers where that is their substance, that is their livelihood? Like, how does that make any sense? I don't know, but there is a possibility for regulation. And I think that is something that's interesting. Yes. Like, how do you think that this could exist? Like we talked a little bit about the CPP and like potentially how they could implement some sort of, health department.
So, turning our eye towards China again, since, they're the main cause of, this, what's going on. And I believe they should bear some responsibility, although this pandemic, this kind of this huge scale of outbreak, it could happen to any country. But China I think China should bear some responsibility, and they need to really look at their culture, their eating habits, their culture. We all can, but right now we're just talking about China, and I think that they really. China's notorious, right? Food regulation is not a thing. It's not important, and it should be, and it needs to be. And then now I hope that they know that they have to do this. And I think, also changing a culture of, Chinese herbal medicine, like, eating tiger penis. Okay, like we need to move on with the modern world. Okay. I'm all about Chinese herbs. Like I'm a big proponent. I think in a holistic approach, like health wise, it's a great thing. But when you're dealing with wild, particularly exotic animals, it's like, there's no reason. There's no reason why we can't, or they need to try to change public perception and culture and close that, Chinese herbal medicine loophole that allows these people to sell these things, which includes the rhinoceros horns, by the way.
I'm glad you're touching on this because I think that there's oftentimes when there's any criticism of Eastern medicine or Western medicine, it's like, oh, you're delegitimizing thousands of years of medicine. And if you think one part of it is wrong, you must think every part of it is wrong. And it's like, well, no, like I agree with you. Like there's so much value, I think, in herbal medicine and acupuncture, in these pressure points and chi and all these things that are like, wow, there is real power to that. But I think we have to bring it into modern times. It's sort of like saying, 100 years ago or so, we were lobotomizing people with mental health issues. We were giving them electric shock. They were literally thrown in institutions and treated like lepers. Now we've adjusted and changed. Just because I think that was an improper practice and it was inhumane doesn't mean I believe that all psychology and all mental health, helping anyone with mental health issues is wrong. No, it's just one little part of it that could evolve and change and be brought into modern times and modern treatment.
You said it, evolving. We all have to evolve as a human race. And you know what we did like 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, may not apply anymore because now we know more because we have evolved and we know more. And what we know should be applied to how we do things because that's how you advance humanity and progress. Right. It's called progress. So I mean, you know, the CCP can make factories disappear in a day and move and clean up the air in a matter of like months to clean up the air for the Olympics. So it's like, they can't tell me that it's not doable. Exactly. Okay, of all the places that's doable,
it's China.
The ones, okay,
they've got power.
Exactly, they've got the. So I mean, it's like, you know, them refusing to do that. That's the ultimate thing. Is like not refusing to acknowledge the problem and try to fix it, and then not cover it up.
That's a whole nother can of worms.
Because they want to save face.
I know. It's oh God.
It's like our president. He wants to save face.
And it's like it's not about you, dude. This is about the future of the human race as we're, you know, moving into the
facing like extinction level like crisis.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's gnarly. I mean, I got to tell you, like, I don't know how you're coping with all this, but I have been like sipping some CBD like you wouldn't believe, girl. Oh my God. What is that deliciousness?
So I made so my friends own the base company.
Oh my God, I love the base co.
And they make their own syrups, and they're usually at Smorgasburg on Sundays, which, as you know, is completely done for now. But they also sell these bases, and you can make your own mocktails. Because I know I don't drink anymore. Right. So, you know, but I love cocktails. I loved cocktails, but I just want the alcohol out of there. So with the base, I could still make mixology level things, drinks to enjoy, but I don't have to do all the work.
I love that. So then do you I know you're a big proponent for CBD and THC and all that. So do you atomize it? Do you drop it in there? Like what's your method of sort of dosing?
So I'm going to show you. So this is Imbue CBD. It's a full spectrum CBD. I love it. My friend, Dr. John Kim, sent this to me. It's 500 milligrams. The trick is you can always infuse your drinks with CBD, and I highly recommend it. But you know, if you're going to have alcohol in your drink, you need to use CBD tinctures because that's alcohol based and it will dissolve in your drink. So you can like have all of it. If you use a CBD oil, then you're going to have to, like when you're making your syrup, that's when you add your CBD oil in there so that it can infuse into the syrup. Otherwise, it'll just kind of like, you'll just see little bubbles of it because it doesn't bind with water.
It's you know, it's like oil and vinegar. You know what I mean? You got to emulsify the oil. It makes sense. So you kind of like, if you were to want to do it that way, you did have the oil, you could emulsify it, maybe using a whisk with the base before adding.
While you're baking your syrup or whatever. Yes.
Oh, I really love that idea. Well, that's a whole nother episode in its own right.
I know.
It's so great. I'm really enjoying these little guys. I don't know if you've had them, the cans.
So Drink Can is a great brand. Is that one is just CBD,
this
right?
This is 2 milligrams THC and 4 CBD. I'm a lightweight these days.
Oh yeah. Did you get that at a dispensary?
I got it via Ease.
Yeah, because of the THC. Yep. Yes. You know, personally, I think any product that includes a little bit of THC is the way to go because the entourage effect, all the cannabinoids work together to help you and give you the maximum benefit. So
I love that.
We're in quarantine. The world is falling apart. And you know what? Some CBD, some alcohol, some THC is probably what's going to get us through mentally in one piece.
That's exactly right. Oh my God. Or combination thereof, huh? Oh
yes.
Going back to a little bit where we're talking about, do you feel that there is some xenophobia at play here? Like, I feel like we're demonizing this, you know, these traditions really, and kind of being like, oh, it's because of you. Like, you know, Fauci has even said, it boggles my mind when we have so many diseases that emanate out of these unusual human-animal interactions that we don't just shut it down. Yet again, we just talked about Tyson and Smithfield. What is up with that? It seems like a real and like part of this huge anti-Chinese sentiment that's just plaguing society right now.
I'm going to take the unpopular stance here and not be as politically correct. I mean, sometimes countries deserve the criticism and the shit they get. Just like us, we deserve so much of the shit talking out there.
Fair.
So
fair. Totally fair.
I mean, you know, China isn't, I mean, there are a lot of great things about China. It is part of my culture, although I don't really identify with mainland Chinese. But I mean, they deserve it. I have no, I don't blame them for everything, but they really need to step up and own this shit.
Yeah.
Own
Absolutely.
it and say, you know what? Like we made a mistake and now we need the international community to step in to help us. Let's help each other so that we can make sure that we don't do this again. But again, it's the ego, it's the face saving, it's you know, SARS, avian flu, bird flu, whatever, all this stuff. It's like, you know, there's a reason why it's coming out of there.
I mean, the CCP certainly deserves some criticism here, but it really irks me that there is so much violence and anger that is ensued towards Asian Americans here in the US. And I think we both can agree that that ignorant BS really needs to stop. I mean, it's not like the Chinese people are at fault for their government failing them. It's certainly not the fault of a Chinese American's fault that there's a virus, lest any Asian American. And it's just so frustrating to see the domino effect that this is all having. I should say, you know, part of this too, like I love all my friends from Hong Kong, right? Like the thing I love about Hong Kongers is like, you're culturally connected to the mainland. It's so close. I mean, you can literally drive like it's, and you know, now there's this like,
you can just walk over the bridge basically.
So, you know, you're connected culturally, but in terms of being very hypercritical of the, you know, communist regime and the politics, like you're very open about it. And so I should say that you were born and raised in Hong Kong. Yeah.
I was born in Hong Kong. I spent a small part of my childhood there. And then I moved to Taiwan, to Taipei. And then I moved here when I was 9 to the States. But I used to spend all my summers there. We went back very often and I would see my cousins there. And so, I've stayed really connected throughout my life to Asia, except for maybe like the last 5 to 10 years. It's been not as much.
Yeah. But now, so you guys, what you're doing at PRD, I think is so interesting. I love the Dai Pai Dongs. I think that was like one of my favorite parts of traveling around Hong Kong. Is just like, whoa, this really vibrant, really cool. They're kind of like street food shacks, I guess maybe you'd say. How would you describe what a Dai Pai Dong is, first of all?
So Dai Pai Dong, Dai Pai is the license that they get to have these stalls. That's what's called a Dai Pai. Pai is like the license. Dai, it means like big. So it's like it's a reference to the license that they have to have these stalls. Dong is just like a little like stand and stall. So that's literally what it means is Dai Pai Dong. It's like a big licensed stall.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea that's what it
literally
meant.
Translated.
Wow.
Yeah, so these stalls are licensed, but you know, in the last, ever since the handover and you know all this stuff, they've done a lot of cleaning up of these street vendors basically, and you know, for hygiene reasons, for a lot of these different reasons, they decided to do that. And I think Bangkok is looking at that same thing where they're trying to clean it up, which is unfortunate, but I understand why they're doing that. Again, it goes back to food handling and food regulations and, you know, all of this, like, I think as we talk about this, it's all interconnected.
It is, absolutely. And that's why I love you, because you think so much like I do. I'm like, well, you can't have one with you after the other. And then it opens up the door to another conversation. I remember that being an issue in Thailand where they were talking about eliminating these street food vendors. I think there may be some sort of world where, I mean, I love Singapore. I think their hawker culture is incredible. If you guys haven't been to Singapore, you need to go. These hawker centers are really the center of their food culture. And they were similarly, there was a point in time when those street vendors were outside, but then they were brought into kind of malls, like a mega mall, but it's like a food court basically. And kind of some of them are somewhat open air and they're highly regulated. They make the LA County Health Department look relaxed.
Look like, exactly.
It's pretty, I mean, and everything is so clean. The food is so ridiculously delicious because of the melange of humans that live there and the really cool international influence. And so I feel like maybe there's an opportunity like to not completely wipe this stuff out, just put it into an area where it can be a little bit more regulated. There are people health department officials passing through. And so the culinary culture isn't totally lost, right?
I feel like we're in such times of like extremism. It's all or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why can we like not work to improve it? It's like there has to be some middle ground, you know, just like people are like, now we have to like, you know, not eat meat and be vegan. It's like, that is not practical. Right. Okay. Like, let's talk about some practical solutions here. And so I think Singapore is a really, really good example of, you know, I mean, they're already very clean. I think it's part of their culture, just like Japan, to be very clean and orderly, and they're very hygienic. I think this is already embedded into their practices as a culture. And I think we all need to do that.
Right. I mean, it's really ingrained in the culture. But I mean, you know, Singapore really is a relatively new country. I mean, 1965 really wasn't that long ago. But that cleanliness, that sort of sterility has really become a part of the culture.
Singapore is very sterile.
It is like, I mean, that comes at a cost, right? Like all this, like, you kind of feel like you're scared. I mean, you're scared that you're going to break a law, just like crossing the street or like blowing your nose,
but,
you know?
Okay, so here's the thing.
But there's some
it works though, because they're a small island. That same thing is not going to apply here. There's no way.
Yeah. No, but I feel like there are lessons we can, you know, little cues we can take. But tracing back to the Dai Pai Dong, did I say that right? It sounds totally ridiculous. I think, you know, one of the things that I'm a little bit worried about is when we talk about eliminating the wet markets or drastically changing their infrastructure, is that some of these places like Tung Po, I loved. That was one of the coolest, like, whoa, what a wild experience is this place, guys, in Hong Kong. And it exists. It's right above a wet market. And there are a couple seafood restaurants in this very large area, but the owner is freaking hilarious. He like moonwalks to Michael Jackson. Everybody's drinking and having an amazing time. He's opening beer bottles with chopsticks. Like, it's a wild, wild time. But he does operate his restaurant right above a wet market. And so I'm wondering, like, what will happen to Ronnie? Like, what? Oh, that like breaks my heart every time I think about it. I just kind of get choked up.
I honestly don't know what's going to happen to wet markets and what's going to happen to these people. I do know that the Dai Pai Dong culture is very unique and it should not go away.
Every time I just can't. It's like, there's not enough CBD in the freaking world to deal with that sort of thing. But sometimes I'll, you know, like obviously I'm reading the news and it's just like, am I in an episode of The Black Mirror? Like, what is going on, dude? What is happening?
Why are we in this? I feel like the pandemic happened at like the worst time. There cannot be any more worse time.
I mean, certainly the people in power are, you know, it couldn't have been worse, but also at the same time, I feel like everything structurally has been so wrong for so long, and the world and the way it operates has been benefiting so very few. And it's like, we all know of the inequity. It's across the board. I mean, of course,
it's a house of cards and it's tumbling.
And it's like, it's really time to kind of restructure these things. And some things that we know and love are going to have to go. Like, I just know it's sad, but it's, you know, maybe there are a couple of wet markets that are shut down. Maybe a couple of street food vendors, like, fuck, that sucks. Like, just this morning, I was reading the news about Auburn closing. Bon Temps closed yesterday. Like, those are some of the city's greatest fine dining establishments. Like, but if that happening leads to a restructuring of the restaurant industry, or if, you know, the wet markets being really heavily regulated leads to a more secure food system globally, like, these are all really good endings to a really fucked up story. But like, we have the opportunity to choose our own adventure here, you know?
I know. And I feel like regulations, and I know the right-wing people will disagree with me, but regulations are not a bad thing.
No. Come on. I mean,
regulations Yes, it's costly sometimes. And, corporations have to, corporations are another topic here, but, they need to spend some money in fixing things. But it's like, you know what? It's like, fix it now or fix it. It's like long pain or short pain. Like you choose, but it's like, we have to do this. Right. So I feel like government, people want smaller governments and want smaller government. And then now they want the government to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, up to Z. And it's like, well, if you want a small government, then how are they supposed to provide for all this shit?
Yeah, it's wild. What's really interesting about PRD is that you are keeping those traditions alive in a format that is clean, healthy, safe, international, global. You're exposing these really storied traditions from Hong Kong to a whole new audience here in LA. Is that kind of part of your mission, or, are you driven by continuing to keep that story alive through food?
I think PRD started because we just wanted to, Johnny pretty much wanted to cook stuff that was just like familiar to us and things we grew up with. And, I feel like Cantonese cuisine is dying. And then, I don't know if you saw the recent news, but a lot of the democratic leaders in Hong Kong have been arrested. The one country, two systems is quickly crumbling before its time. And so, I do think China has an agenda. Eventually it's to like wipe out the Cantonese culture, the Hong Kong culture. Look at what they're doing to the Uyghurs, right? Yeah. So, there's no way they're going to be putting everybody in concentration camps, but it's like the encroachment is like, it just comes in more and more and more and more. And so right now the world is distracted with the pandemic. And so, all eyes are on our own selves, but we're not looking at what's happening there. And now the Communist Party is taking full advantage of that.
So they've leaders and they've imprisoned them, or what are they just, or they've just ousted them?
Yeah, they've imprisoned. I don't know what's going to happen, but,
it's so frustrating because the Cantonese culture is so beautiful and rich, and it's its whole different thing.
It's its own thing.
You've got your own language, own culinary culture, own traditions. Oh my God, that like breaks my heart. Even just when I was there was it last year? Yeah, 20. Yeah. So like, what day is it?
I don't know what.
So crazy, but we were out at is it Tai-O, the fishing village. Oh my gosh. I just need you to you're like insert Elaine.
No, it's okay. No, of course. You're good.
But yeah, it was so fascinating. And they were talking about how these women, they're clam diggers, and like there's only a handful of these women left because, these tiny fishermen have really been squashed out because A, there's just not enough to fish in the ocean anymore. It's been completely dragged by trawlers. And B, it's just like so hard to make a living, on a small scale. People aren't eating like that anymore. People don't want, buying from small, tiny little fisherwomen. So I don't know. We got to keep these little things alive in whatever way that we can. And I think what you guys are doing is really important for that reason.
Yeah. A lot of it comes from just nostalgia and then not being able to find the things around. Even in, San Gabriel Valley, you can see it's a largely, even in the Asian areas with Asian cuisine, it's predominantly in the Chinese aspect of like Chinese cuisine. It's a lot of mainland Chinese food, and they're great. And I love it. I mean, part of my culture is Shanghainese, which is where my dad's from. And, I love Shanghainese food, and I've been kind of revisiting that with my home cooking. But Cantonese cuisine, like you just don't really see that anymore. And I think, more in LA and in San Francisco, you still see a lot, Vancouver, obviously. But with the big influx of the mainland Chinese immigrants, the Cantonese cuisine is by and large, slowly shrinking.
And I know I was watching the Fung Brothers. They did a little pop in on talking about that topic. And I think there's a really cool movement of like young Cantonese chefs like Johnny who are doing like the guys at Needle.
Oh yeah, Yang's Kitchen.
Yeah. There's just kind of this young rice box. Yep. And they're all kind of like comfort foods. Like you're talking about the nostalgia, the simplicity. And I think it's really neat that there are some, really great young Cantonese chefs here in LA that even in the city center, which is really cool, bringing that to even a wider audience, it's important.
Personally, I think everything's cyclical. I don't know if you noticed that. Like Italian food used to be really big in LA, and then it fell off flavor, and then it was like Peruvian, and then it was like, I think everything was like cyclical because, our tastes change, like our moods change, we're fickle. And we're lucky we're in LA and we have all this variety, but I think a lot of this is cyclical. But the sad thing is that a lot of the Cantonese cuisine in particular is like nobody's learning it. The newer generations, the younger generations aren't learning it. So eventually, like, you have to question, is this cuisine going to die out?
Yeah. It's an endangered food, if you will.
It's an endangered food. It's an endangered culture. It's an endangered food. And I think within my lifetime, we'll see a big shrinkage in that kind of culture, particularly when, my parents' generation dies. Mm-hmm. Then what? And I think that's why I think Johnny, like all these chefs, like, they're just, they're clinging on to this because they know, like, they're like the last, like, bastion, so to speak, of like Cantonese culture.
Sure, but I think, right now is that time that we're all kind of reaching back to those things that we grew up with and trying to find comfort. And so maybe this crazy time in history will help us really like reach back and dig deep and reconnect with those dishes and continue to cook them. I mean, that's so important. I'm seeing so many chefs on, IG Live and everything. I love, like we were talking about yesterday, Maylin's scallion pancakes. Like, this is a woman who does like super plated fine dining food. And now she's making XO sauce and scallion pancakes. And like people are doing that. So I do hope that, this time, which is really trying, does teach us some lessons. And there are many we could learn for sure.
I think this is going to really shake up the dining landscape. Fine dining is not, I don't know. I mean, in today's, with all the hygiene protocols and, dining room reductions and capacity reductions, I personally, it makes me very sad, but I don't think fine dining is going to endure. They'll come back, sure, but for the time being, it's not sustainable. And because of that, and I think all of us see the writing on the wall. We don't want to face it, but the writing is there. And if you acknowledge it and you look at it, you're going to realize, like, okay, the fine dining is going to be out, but what's going to be in is, personally, I think it's going to be like really cool because a lot of creative shit is going on and people are getting really creative. I see that. I feel the energy there, and I'm beginning to see it like manifest into a lot of these really cool things. And I feel like it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I mean, look, we've been through this before. My first job in editorial, I was hired on in 2008, like I said, to the Times Media Group that was going through a bankruptcy. It was a fucking nightmare. But it was in the middle of the recession and a peak recession. And it was at the time that fine dining, like literally what's happening now happened then. And like, it was really great because it actually put LA in this position to be uplifted, because we've always been a city that is, of humble, beautiful immigrant cuisine, Korean, Vietnamese, Cantonese, Shanghainese. I mean, you name it. It's here. We have all of that really great, affordable, international cuisine. And so I feel like, this, we've seen it happen before. We got through it before. And then, in the past couple of years, we ramped back up to where we were, pre-recession again. And here we go. I mean, the economy goes in cycles, just like everything in life goes in cycles. I mean, I kind of want to make this like special stew of cultures from around the world, because there's so many beautiful parts of each and every, and it's like, just put it in a mixing pot and I guess it's what Los Angeles is really. It's like truly a melting pot. There's so much we can learn from each other, I think. And
we can, and we should. And I think this is a really good example.
It's been so insightful talking to you about this topic, because it's certainly a big piece of the puzzle is these markets, what is, arguably they're still debatable if it really was the nexus of it all. And will we ever know, especially when China's involved? I don't know, but it's certainly likely.
It's very probable.
Yeah, it's very probable that this was the nexus of it all. And I think, it's going to be a building block from which we create from here on out. So I'm so glad to get your perspective. Thank you so much for that.
No, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Cannot wait until we can be sitting over a bowl of congee again, face to face, IRL.
I know. Soon.
But
with masks on.
Yes, with masks and some really stylish little gloves. But in the meantime, where can people find, PRD? Where can they find you?
PRD, well, PRD we're right next to Howling Rays in the Far East Plaza in Chinatown, Unit 130. It's been pretty interesting being in Chinatown, but I think it's working out. We're there Wednesday to Sunday, right now 11 to 7, but check our Instagram at PRD_LA for updates, and particularly check our stories because that's where all the secret sauce is.
Oh, I love a good food pun, girl. Well, thank you so much. And we will definitely be talking to you soon. And I will be doing a direct pickup from you guys shortly because I need some of my look bomb AF. Well, cheers, Elaine. Much health, much wealth.
Health and wealth.
And lots of CBD.
And may we survive this in one piece.
Yes, surviving and thriving.